When we were very young, and I mean much younger than we are today, we tended to take everything at face value. It's part of that beautiful thing we might call innocence, and it simply assumes that everything is as it appears to be, and everybody is as they claim to be. But we now know that that isn't true. We've seen with our eyes, we've heard with our ears enough to persuade us that there is at least a degree of dishonesty and duplicity in this world in which we live. Of course, we may wish that this wasn't the case, and for the sake of our sanity, we might even pretend that this isn't a particularly serious problem. But the longer we live, or the older we grow, the more we are likely to see it to be true. Now, this isn't to say that there is no longer any truth to be found in people, nor is it a reason to become inexcusably cynical about life. But if we insist that everyone is telling the truth, or that everyone is acting from pure selfless motives, then sooner or later we're going to become very disappointed. Not terribly long ago, here in the UK, we underwent a number of local and regional elections. And in the process, we were subject to a somewhat lengthy deal of political campaigning, in which it's generally understood that countless individuals will cite statistics that simply don't add up and make promises which are either impossible to fulfill or which none actually has any intention of doing so. And there I go, sounding like a decrepit old cynic. But yes, I know that there are still a few decent, well, relatively decent people in public office. At least a few who wouldn't make the Emperor Nero look like some sort of public benefactor. But there's a general expectation that a certain class of people will say things only to win your vote, and then continue to act as they had always intended all along. And I rather dislike that, and I suspect you do too. In his Gospel, John records a rather extravagant event which took place shortly before the death of Jesus. It occurred, he says, 6 days before the Passover, a major Jewish festival, and in the town of Bethany, just a couple of miles east of Jerusalem, where Lazarus lived with his two sisters. You may recall that Lazarus was the chap whom Jesus had raised from the dead a little while earlier. Well, there are all sorts of fascinating details associated with this story that we simply do not have time to investigate here. But the incident took place during a dinner which seems to have been held in honor of Jesus, the one who had raised Lazarus from the dead, as we said, not terribly long ago. We're told that Lazarus was present at the dinner, reclining at the table with Jesus, and his two sisters were there too. Martha was serving at the dinner, but Mary had quite different ideas and was about to do something which would be remembered whenever the stories of Jesus were told. She took some jolly expensive ointment and anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair. Now, already there are so many aspects of this upon which we might be tempted to elaborate, but one detail John does share with us is that the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. You might get, you can sense that perhaps. You might get the idea that John is writing as a personal witness to these events, as if he can, still smell the fragrance lingering years later as he writes. But a significant feature of this event is that this ointment was jolly expensive. In fact, its cost was so significant that a certain Judas Iscariot questioned the appropriateness of this action, bearing in mind that it could have been sold for a year's wages. I mean, that's incredible, isn't it? Can you imagine a bottle of perfume costing in the region of, £20,000 or even more? I mean, it's no wonder that eyebrows were raised. And though Jesus may well not have been alone in his protestations, it is him who asked, why was this ointment not sold for 300 days' wages and given to the poor? I mean, he had a point, didn't he? This sort of money could have fed a multitude. I mean, it would make the feeding of the 5,000 look like a picnic in the park. Okay, maybe it already did look like that, but you get the idea. I mean, it could have helped a lot of people struggling to make ends meet. And with an argument like that, and at a time such as this, with food prices going through the roof, we might even have been persuaded to give him our vote, were he to be standing in our constituency. But he wasn't. And he also wasn't all that he might have appeared to be, not as he appeared in that moment anyway. Judas was a thief. John tells us that he said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief, and being in charge of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. And there, just for a moment, we might have been fooled into thinking that there was something virtuous about Judas, that he might have actually cared about those in need. But the truth is, he cared only for himself, for his own benefit, and for what he might have gained in the process. I'm not sure whether this was an act of what we might today call virtue signalling on the part of Judas, or whether it was simply one of those impulsive lies that comes from the mouth of one whose heart is addicted to the delights and desires of this world. The fact that Judas was certainly obsessed with greed, however much he might have despised his obsession, the fact that he was obsessed with money was borne out by his willingness to later betray the one whom he professed to love for a mere 30 pieces of silver. Of course, all of this raises interesting questions, such as, why did Jesus, the one who knows all things, why did he allow Judas to be in charge of the money bag? I mean, the idea that some have of the treasurer of a group having the most influence is certainly nonsense. Well, at least it should be. But surely we should at least expect them to be honest. Perhaps this in itself teaches us that when it comes to the things of God, money really is so terribly insignificant. But these are matters for another day. My thoughts here are about the way in which we can be so easily taken in, so easily fooled into thinking that things are the way they might appear to be, and that people might be as they claim to be. Had we been present at this dinner, reclining at this table alongside Jesus and Lazarus, might we have been persuaded that Judas was a decent chap, with a genuine concern for those less fortunate than himself? It's true that John does tell us that this same Judas was the one who was about to betray Jesus, but that was yet to come. And though the other students or disciples of Jesus may not have considered Judas to have been the most important among them, there's no reason to suppose that they had always considered him to be such a bad egg. Indeed, it may well be that they considered him to be a rather benevolent and caring and decent sort of chap. I'm not here for 1 minute suggesting that we should begin to suspect everybody who appears to be benevolent of having some secret ulterior motive. Of course not. But the thing is, we should understand that not everything is the way it might appear. Indeed, when it comes to the matters of this world, we should expect an unhealthy degree of dishonesty or duplicity. I'm not suggesting that we should simply accept such things, but we should understand that this world is very much under the power or influence of the one whom Jesus spoke of as the father of lies. Jesus said that the ruler of this world, who was to be cast out, is the one who does not stand in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks out of his own character, for he is a liar and the father of lies. We see evidence of these lies all around us. We see governments being called to account through public inquiries. Not that we have any reason to suspect that these will be impartial. Television broadcasting companies are again under investigation. And despite the usual apologies and assurances that things will be different in the future, of course, one might be excused for wondering whether one can believe anything they say at all. And of course, it isn't only the mainstream media. Social media is full of claims and counterclaims, accusations, insinuations, protestations, and so many of these are coated with a veneer of credibility and paraded with signals of virtue. Just look at how opposed to injustice I am, they might claim, or see how inclusive and tolerant I am, they'll maybe boast. The righteousness of the unrighteous is simply sickening. As the prophet Isaiah would say, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Woe to those who are wise in their own eyes and shrewd in their own sight." And he could have been writing just as much about those we live among today. And so the politicians, they pontificate, assuring us that they're only acting in our best interests, of course. The commentators condescendingly clarify the situation, expecting us to accept their interpretation as absolute truth. The activists make it abundantly clear that if we don't agree with them, then we are the ones who are intolerant and suffer from some form of phobia or prejudice. But perhaps the most insidious forms of dishonesty and deceit come from those who profess to be righteous in the sight of God, and yet whose actions, like those of Judas, reveal hearts that are far from him. And such is the nature of so much that passes as religion. Jesus spoke of the religious people as hypocrites. They said one thing but did something completely different. They liked to appear to be virtuous, and one can only guess as to what they might have included in their Twitter profile, but they would have wanted you to know that they only did what the Bible told them to do, and that they were vehemently opposed to anything that sounded even remotely like sin. Of course. You hypocrites, Jesus told them. Well did Isaiah prophesy of you when he said, "This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men." They looked good, huh? They sounded so righteous, but their lives simply didn't live up to what was said on the tin. Another time Jesus said, "Watch out. Don't do your good deeds publicly to be admired by others, for you will lose the reward from your Father in heaven. When you give to someone in need, don't do as the hypocrites do, blowing trumpets in the synagogues and streets to call attention to their acts of charity. I tell you the truth, they have received all the reward they will ever get. But when you give to someone in need, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Give your gifts in private, and your Father who sees everything will reward you." And he went on to say, when you pray, don't be like the hypocrites who love to pray publicly on street corners and in the synagogues where everyone can see them. I tell you the truth, that is all the reward they will ever get. But when you pray, go away by yourself, shut the door behind you, and pray to your Father in private. Then your Father, who sees everything, will reward you. So, what do we do with all of this? We're living in a world where so much is said by so many people about so many things. It can be really difficult to know who, if anybody, can be trusted. Is anything as it appears to be? Is anybody as they claim to be? When I think of those who had gathered for dinner in that house at Bethany, I know not to trust Judas. And I know to give no credit to his appeal on behalf of the poor. Any sign of virtue was nothing more than a charade to cover for his selfish greed and his dishonesty. I know that. I know to trust in the presence of Lazarus, for his place at that table demonstrated the power of Jesus over life and death, and so powerful was that testimony that those who opposed Jesus were determined that Lazarus should die once more to remove the evidence and testimony that he had become by his very presence. But it's the person of Jesus in whom I place my absolute trust. And it is this absolute trust which led Mary to demonstrate such loving devotion to the one who alone can save. A devotion that was without any show or pretense, but which demonstrated a complete truthfulness and humility of worship. At the conclusion of this whole episode, Jesus cried out and said, "Whoever believes in me believes not in me, but in him who sent me. And whoever sees me sees him who sent me. I've come into the world as light, so that whoever believes in me may not remain in darkness. If anyone hears my words and does not keep them, I do not judge him, for I did not come to judge the world, but to save the world. The one who rejects me and does not receive my words has a judge. The word that I have spoken will judge him on the last day. For I've not spoken on my own authority, but the Father who sent me has himself given me a commandment, what to say and what to speak. And I know that his commandment is eternal life. What I say, therefore, I say as the Father has told me." And in all of that, I find such great reassurance. May God bless us with his word of truth. May he give us grace that we might learn to trust him ever more fully, day by day. It may be that nothing is as it appears to be. It may be that nobody is all that they claim to be other than Jesus, for he is the embodiment of all that is true. He is himself the truth. Thank you. Maybe there's been something here for us to think about today.